Hello everyone, and welcome to part 3 of the Twitter project with Spark Streaming. So now we're going to finish off our project by setting up a Jupyter Notebook with Spark that will connect to the socket connection created by that tweetread.py file we created in the previous lecture. And remember, inside that .py file, you're going to have to fill in your credentials for everything to work. Okay. Now, overall for this lecture, I really highly recommend that you actually avoid typing out the instructions on your own and instead use the provided notebook. And the provided notebook is under the Spark Streaming folder. It's called Introduction to Spark Streaming. Now, there are many places where a simple typo can mess everything up, or if you run a cell in the wrong order, everything can get messed up. And unfortunately, the nature of SQL context and the sockets almost always require you to restart your VirtualBox to get going again. So that's why I really recommend you just download the notes and follow along with the notes and run the cells as I run them. In fact, I encourage this so much that I won't be personally typing it out for this lecture. I'm going to explain line by line what's already provided for you in the notebooks that come with the course. Now, depending on how many times you actually run through this exercise, the port you assign in tweetread.py may already be in use, meaning if you run through this lecture, everything's working, and then you do Control-C, stop, and you want to run it again, sometimes that tweetread.py may read something like port already in use. So I'm going to go over how to change that port. It's actually really simple. You just essentially just change the integer number for the port to something else. But I'm going to go over that just in case you find yourself with that particular problem of port already in use. Okay, now one quick final note. In order to use one of the visualization libraries, we actually need to install one more library called Pandas. So what I want you to do is in that VirtualBox at your terminal, just type pip3 install pandas, just like we installed Seaborn and Matplotlib earlier. And then once you install that at the terminal, I want you to restart your VirtualBox Ubuntu machine before following along with this lecture. So right now, if you want, pause the video, go to your terminal, do pip3 install pandas, and then once that's ready to go, restart your VirtualBox Ubuntu machine, and then you're ready to follow along with this particular lecture. Okay, so here are the overall steps we're going to take. We're going to quickly review the tweetread.py file, and we'll actually change the port on it just to review how you can change the port in case you get an error of port already in use. Then you're going to open up the provided notebook file, and you're going to scroll all the way down to the Twitter section. You're not going to run all the cells in it. And then we'll run the .py file and the cells in the correct order as we explain what's happening line by line. And in that notebook, there's two instances where it says you can run tweetread.py. It actually doesn't really matter when you actually run tweetread.py. What matters is that you are running it by the time you start your Spark Streaming section. And we'll talk about that later on. And as I mentioned, there are many steps that must be done in the exact order for this entire process to work. And if you do even a single step out of order, you're going to essentially need to restart your VirtualBox and start all over again, which is why I highly recommend that you take your time with this, just watch the video, and use the provided notes. Okay, so using the provided tweetread.py and introduction to Spark Streaming, it's going to save you a lot of time and frustration. Even with myself, when I was trying to type this manually, I would make a simple typo or accidentally run a cell in the wrong order, maybe miss a parentheses, and I kept messing up. So really, using the provided files is going to save you a ton of time, a ton of frustration, and it's going to build enough understanding where you can tackle your own projects when you want. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to go to my VirtualBox, and remember, I just did a fresh restart of this VirtualBox, so it's ready to go. Alright, here I am at my VirtualBox. Remember, I just restarted my VirtualBox, and if you kind of skipped the slides for this particular lecture, please go back and read them all. You had to actually install Pandas, but hopefully you saw all the slides and did those instructions. And now what we're going to do is we're going to open up two terminals. So come over here, and then search your computer for terminal. I already have it here. And then we're going to open one more up. So one of these will be running our tweetread.py file, and the other one will be running our Jupyter Notebook file. Okay, so first I want to review that tweetread.py file, explain a little bit more about what it's doing, and then show you how you can change the port in case you ever get an error that says port already in use. So my file, I saved it under downloads because we edited it in the Jupyter Notebook, and then I said save as tweetread.py. So it's under downloads for me. I'm going to double click it. Okay, and at the bottom of tweetread.py, once you have it open, you'll notice that this is where we have our port number assigned and our host number assigned. And then it also says listening on port. That's just a string. But in case you ever run this, if you run this more than one time, you may start getting an error that says port already in use. If you ever get that, it's no big deal. All you have to do is change this port number to something else that you know is not in use. And you can just go down one, like 9998. And then to make it clear, you can always just change the string to now listening on port 9998. So I'm going to do that. and I don't actually need to do it because I just did a restart, but just in case, I wanted to walk through that, and then just do Control S to save or Command S, and you're ready to go. So we're going to close that, and then in one of these terminals, we're going to come back here and get that file ready to go. So we'll say cd into downloads, and then if I do ls, it lists my files, and I have tweetread.py. So I will say Python 3, then tab autocomplete, and I'm not going to hit enter yet. I'm going to have that ready to go. And we'll tell you later on when to actually run this file. And then in my other terminal, I'm going to start a Jupyter Notebook. So then we'll let that open up. And here in my Jupyter Notebook viewer, I've downloaded the Introduction to Spark Streaming Notebook. You can just go to it in your unzipped file of notes. It's under the Spark Streaming folder. Click on that and open that up. Again, I highly recommend that you, instead of typing along, just actually use this particular file. So once you have this open, scroll down past the actual introduction example that we went through. You're not going to run any of those cells, so keep scrolling down until you get to the Twitter example. And now this is what we're actually going to be using. So I'm going to zoom in here just a little bit so it's easier for us to see. Okay, so here I have the Twitter example ready to go. And as a quick note, remember you need to have your developer API account ready to go, and you can do that with apps.twitter.com. So here I mentioned you can begin running the tweetread.py file at the very beginning of this, and make sure to add your own IP address and credential keys. That local IP address should work just fine, that 127.0.0.1. And if you want, you could run the tweetread.py file right now. It shouldn't really matter either way. What really matters is that you run it before you actually initiate the Spark Streaming start sequence. So we'll leave that for now since we're already at the notebook. And if you downloaded the notebook, you won't find these Find Spark lines because they're kind of custom to you. So what you need to do is, if you're running this on VirtualBox and you're using Find Spark, run Find Spark and then connect it to whatever Spark is saved. So you've probably been doing that the whole course if you've been following along with a VirtualBox. Okay, now there's 4 lines that we need to focus on, and those are the actual import lines. So we'll say from PySpark, import a Spark context. We've seen that before. Then from PySpark.streaming, import a streaming context. Then from PySpark.SQL, import a SQL context. And then finally, we're going to import from PySpark.SQL.functions, import DESC. That's going to allow us to order things in descending order. All right, so that's ready to go. So I will run this and do all the imports. And then once that cell is ran, what we need to do is say SC is equal to Spark context. Now remember, you can only run this once. If I try running this more than one time, I'll start getting an error. So I'm going to run this cell, and that's going to create the actual Spark context. Then the next thing I'm going to run is this cell right here, which is the streaming context. And the streaming context takes in the SC Spark context that I just created. And then we have the SSC. And then what I'm going to do is also assign the Spark context that we created and pass that into a SQL context. That's going to allow me to later on just use simple SQL syntax to actually query the SQL context that I just created, or I should say the Spark context. So run that as well. Again, basically just converting our Spark context to a streaming context and a SQL context that we can access to later. And then I have the socket stream. So this socket stream is where I'm actually going to expect to connect to tweetread.py. So this line and this line need to match up with whatever is in tweetread.py. The defaults in tweetread.py was this IP and this particular port number. We just changed the port number to 9998, so we'll run that as well. So that's going to connect to that socket. And then what we're going to do is, just like we did in the previous simpler example, have lines be a socket stream window. So we're taking them. And then what we're going to do is the following. We are going to say from collections, import a named tuple. And a named tuple is almost like a really quick way to create a class. Essentially what it is, it's a tuple where each element actually is assigned a name. So it has fields. And in this case, the fields are going to be the tag and the count. So our main idea is to do a count of the actual hashtags in the tweets. So for every window that we get, we're going to take a hashtag of the tweets themselves. So we're going to now run this, and now we essentially have almost what's like a class, this little tweet object that ends up creating a named tuple with the tweet itself and then the fields. So we're going to expand this a little bit to see the next line. Now I expanded the next cell a little bit so we can get an idea of what's going on, and hopefully a lot of this will look familiar to you based off our simpler word count example. Okay, so the very first step is we grab the line, that's the actual string, that's one long tweet, and we're going to split it on whitespace to actually get a list of all the words in the tweet. Then what we're going to do is use .filter, and .filter is going to filter out things based on a condition. So what we do is for every word in that now list, we're going to lowercase it and check if it starts with a hashtag, because essentially what we want to do is just count the actual hashtags. So we'll say word.lower, and then the dot starts with is basically just a method you can call off of any Python string to check if it starts with a particular set of characters. So then we have that. What we ended up doing is we took our single tweet string, made it into a list of all the words, including the hashtagged words. Then we filtered it, so now we have a list of only the hashtag words. And then what we're going to do is lowercase that word, and then add a 1 here with a tuple. So it lowercases that word, sets it up in a tuple, just like we did when we did the simple word count. Essentially here we're just making sure that it's lowercase. And then what we're going to do is reduce by key to actually get a word count here of the hashtags. Once we've done that, what we're going to do is store that into a tweet object to work with later. And remember, our tweet object is just this named tuple with the tag and the count. And the reason for that is so we can plot it later on. Then what we do is for each RDD, what we use is the RDD2DF that stores it as a data frame, which then allows us to sort in descending order by count. And the reason we do that is because we want to say limit 10, so grab the first 10 that show up, and register that as a temporary table called tweets. So what that means is for every 10 tweets that we read in, we're going to create this data frame which has a hashtag count, and that data frame is going to be registered as a temporary table called tweets. Later on, when we're actually plotting this, we'll have a plot that kind of refreshes every 10 seconds to show the latest top 10 tweets with the hashtags, etc. So we're going to run this, and then it's now time to run tweetread.py. So as I previously mentioned, you could have already been running tweetread.py. That's not a big deal, but you have to make sure you run tweetread.py before you run this next cell, which actually says the Spark streaming context is ready to start. So we'll hop over back to our terminal, Python 3 tweetread.py, hit enter, and it says it's listening on port 9998. Perfect, so it's ready to go. And now what we're going to do is say ssc.start, run that cell, and then go ahead and jump back to your terminal, and you should see tweets starting to roll in based off the hashtag they have. So here we can see we have the Play Guitar Hero 2 on Medium, etc. I love old soft rock, whatever. So anything that has guitar in it, that's what I'm looking for. So you want to wait a little bit until you get at least 10 tweets in. If you chose a really esoteric topic, you may want to choose something that is definitely going to have a lot of tweets to it. All right, so it looks like I have 10 tweets in, ready to go. So we'll hop back over to the Jupyter Notebook. So now in my Jupyter Notebook, I'm going to run this next cell. And what this next cell does is it does all the imports I need to actually display that plotting mechanism. So we'll say import time, and that is basically a counter. Then IPython import display, that allows me to actually show stuff in the notebook itself. Matplotlib and Seaborn, those are the visualization libraries that we worked with earlier. And then for Jupyter Notebooks, if you want to see something, a plot that is inside the cell, you have to have this little magic command, matplotlib inline. That's only for Jupyter Notebooks, however, so keep that in mind. Okay, so we'll run those imports. Let those roll. And then this very next thing, this is what's actually going to be doing the plotting. So what this does is it sets count equal to 0, and it says while count is less than 10, so it's only going to do this around 10 times, it's going to sleep for 3 seconds, and then it's going to grab the SQL context that we created much earlier, and then call a SQL off of it. And what it's going to do is say select the tag and count columns, remember that was that named tuple we created, from tweets, which if you remember, that was that actual temporary table that we registered. Then what we're going to do is say, take the top 10 tweets and turn them into what's known as a pandas data frame. So that's a data frame library that's meant for smaller data sets like this one, that we've already taken the top 10 and it's ready to go. All the big data stuff, the actual counting, the reducing by key, that was handled by Spark. But now that we actually have a count of those top 10 tweets, it's usable for something like pandas. And I have other courses on those topics. You can just message me if you're interested in them. Okay, then what we're going to do is say display.clearOutput white equals true. So what that is going to do, that's going to clear the output in case we already have a plot. That way we can keep refreshing our plot. Then sns.plt.figure, that just sets the figure size large enough so we can see it. And then we're essentially going to show a bar plot where the x-axis is the count, so the actual count of tweets that had that particular hashtag with it, and then the y equals tag, and then data is equal to that top 10 df. Then we'll show the plot, and we'll say count is equal to count plus 1. So let's run this and see if it works. And here it is. So we can see here that the top hashtags are guitar, deals, feels, sessions, bestseller, and like. And it's showing the mean count. And about every 3 seconds, it's going to keep adding on to this and keep refreshing. So you can see here that we kind of almost have a live dashboard of tweets having to do with guitars. Now you can choose any of those keywords you wanted. Guitar is probably one that's not super interesting because it's just pretty basic stuff. You'll see things like music, piano, jazz guitar, rock, etc. But I hope that you found this exercise pretty interesting in the fact that now you can do live streaming for extremely large streaming data sets. Now keep in mind, for general purposes, if you're going to do your own personal project with Twitter, using Spark Streaming for it might be total overkill. As I mentioned before, that TweetPy library already has its own streaming capabilities, so you might want to explore the documentation there. This sort of Spark Streaming is if when you need kind of to take the entire fire hose that's available for you as a consumer for Twitter, and you can actually pay Twitter more, you can actually pay them money, that is, if you want more data from them. So keep in mind, using Spark Streaming like this for a personal project would probably be overkill unless you're working with a huge data set for streaming purposes. Okay, so once you're ready to kind of stop this, what you can do is scroll down here and just say sse.stop, and that will stop your Spark Streaming context. So I'll run that. And eventually, over in your terminal, you should see coming back up here that this is now broken. So we see broken pipe, it's no longer running. Okay, so then if you want this to definitely stop, you can just do Control-C, and it will stop actually reading everything in the terminal. And that's it. That was your final project. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I really suggest going along with the notebook that we provided for you. It's super easy to make a typo or mistake to make this not work. If you have any questions, feel free to post them to the Q&A forums. Thanks everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the course.